This is an overview of Chapter 20, Unemployment and Inflation. Bank of America announces plans to lay off 30,000 employees. In September 2011, Bank of America, the second largest bank in the United States, announced that it would be laying off 30,000 of its 288,000 employees. To some extent, the layoff has reflected the problems that the banks have had since the financial crisis in 2008. And it also is an indication of the slow recovery from the recession of 2007 to 2009. With unemployment remaining high for more than 2 years after the recession, in June 2009, economists forecast it wouldn't return to normal levels until at least 2 years, some saying it might be stuck at new normals for many years. So during this chapter, we are going to discuss, should you change your career plans if you plan to graduate during a recession? Suppose you are a sophomore majoring in either economics or finance. You plan to find a job in the banking industry after graduation. The economy is now in a deep recession. Unemployment rate is the highest of your lifetime, at over 9%. Sizable layoffs have occurred in the banking industry. See if you can answer these questions by the end of the chapter. Should you change your major? Should you consider a job in the banking industry? In 1960, Arthur Okun, who was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers during President Lyndon Johnson's administration, coined the term misery index, which adds together inflation rate and unemployment rate to give a total rough measure of the state of the economy. So we're going to define unemployment rate, the labor rate, and the labor force participation rate. Each month, the U.S. Bureau of Census conducts the Current Population Survey, also known as the Household Survey. They collect data and compute the unemployment rate. People are considered unemployed if they have worked during the week before the survey and if they were temporarily away from their job because they were ill, on vacation, on strike, or for other reasons. People are considered unemployed if they did not work in the previous week before the survey but were available to work and have actively looked for work sometime during the previous 4 weeks. When we talk about the labor force, it is the sum of the employed and unemployed workers in the economy. The unemployment rate is the percentage of labor force unemployed, or unemployed divided by labor force. The BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, classifies people who do not have a job and who are not actively looking for a job as not in the labor force. This is why the unemployment rate could be so skewed. Many of us have heard the term discouraged workers. These are people who are available for work but have not looked for a job during the previous 4 weeks because they believe no jobs are available to them. The more we're in a recession, or people feel we're in a recession, the more discouraged workers are. The less the unemployment rate reflects the actual unemployment. So, going over this, we have the unemployment status of civilian working population age, which is age 16 to about 65, I believe. In 2011, the statistics said there were 240.1 million people in the working age population. Of that, 154 were considered in the labor force. Of the labor force, 140 million were employed, and unemployed were 14 million. So, to figure out the unemployment rate, we take the 14 million and divide by 154 million in the labor force. So the unemployment rate was 9.909%. Those not in the labor force are not available for work, which are homemakers, retirees, and full-time students. And those currently available for work but not currently working. Of that 6.2 million available for work not currently working, 1 million were considered discouraged workers. If we just counted discouraged workers, I'm going to add that to the unemployed. So that's 15 million divided by 155 million. That would give us a 9.7% unemployment rate. And those currently not working, looking for work because they have childcare responsibilities or transportation problems or other problems that prevent them from working, that's another 5.2 million people. So, remember, number of unemployed divided by labor force times 100% equals the employment rate. So on these figures, it's 14 million divided by 154 times 100, or 9.1% unemployment. The labor force participation rate, you actually have to know the unemployment rate for the exam, but the labor force participation rate is the labor force divided by working age population times 100%. so the 154 million, or 64.1%. The employment population ratio is the working age population, which is employment divided by working age population times 100%, or 58.3%. What happens if you include the military? So currently, active military service members are not part of the employment rate, the labor force, or the working age population. How could the unemployment rate or the labor force participation rate change if we included people in the military being counted as in the labor force, but would leave the number of people counted as unemployed the same? So, for example, if we had 100 million people in the working age population and are in the labor force, and we're not counting 1 million people in the military, it would increase the labor force participation rate by 5%, 0.5%. So let's talk about problems measuring unemployment rate. Although the BLS reports unemployment rate measured to the 10th percentage, it is not the perfect measure of the current state of joblessness. One problem is that it distinguishes between the unemployed and people who are not in the labor force. Other measurement problems can measure the unemployment rate to overstate the true extent of the joblessness rate, because household survey does not verify the response of the people. Also, the unemployment rate provides some useful information about employment situation in the country, but as far as an exact measure of joblessness in the economy, it's not exact. The red line shows the usual measure of unemployment rate. The blue line shows what if they what if the BLS had counted as unemployed all the people who were available for work but not actively looking for jobs, and all the people who were in part-time jobs but wanted full-time jobs. Look at how much more significant. So we would be approaching like 20% if we included people who were not actively looking and people who wanted full-time jobs but only had part-time jobs. We've seen a trend of increase in women in the labor force and a decrease in men in the labor force. Since 1948, there's been significant change for women. So at this point, it's about 50%. Unemployment rates are different for different groups. So by ethnic group, the unemployment rate for Asians was significantly less. This is the unemployment rate for the average population. For Hispanics and African Americans, it was above the national average. Based on education level, as we see, the more education, the less likely you are to be unemployed. So how long are people typically unemployed? During the Great Depression of the 1930s, some people were unemployed for years at a time. In the modern U.S. economy, the typical unemployed person stays unemployed for a relatively brief period of time. In April 2007, which was a period of economic expansion, 82% of the people who were unemployed had been unemployed for less than 6 months. Fast forward to after the recession in 2011, the economy was growing slowly, but only 55% of the unemployed had been jobless for less than 6 months. So it went from 82 to 55. That means they were looking for work for much longer periods of time. The average period of unemployment was only 17 weeks in 2007, but 41 weeks in 2011. The severity of the unemployment during and after the recession was a sharp break from the normal U.S. experience. So this talks about the average weeks of unemployment. So we've typically been below this 25 mark until the recession. So in addition to the household survey, other measures of employment are sometimes called the payroll survey. The establishment survey provides information on the total number of persons who are employed and on a company payroll. The establishment survey has the following 4 drawbacks. It does not provide information on self-employed individuals because they're not on a company payroll. It fails to count some persons employed at newly opened firms that have not been included in the survey, and it does not provide unemployment information. Despite the drawbacks, the establishment survey has been an advantage of determining by actual payroll rather than unverified answers. So they're just talking about the differences of the establishment survey and then the household survey. And the household survey gives an unemployment rate, but they technically don't vet any of the answers, if you will. Okay, so there's always revisions. You've heard this, right? So over time, the BLS revises its preliminary estimates and changes the unemployment data. So this is the revisions to the employment data. As you can see, during 2008 and 2009, basically these were jobs lost. These were jobs gained during that time. Job creation and destruction over time. So here's some stats about creating and eliminating jobs. Existing establishments, there were 1,447,000, and they had jobs of 5,609,000. New establishments, and they had jobs of 1,345,000. So the existing establishments eliminating jobs, and then they have closing establishments. So we have a lot going on here. The types of unemployment. So there are 3 types of unemployment: frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, cyclical unemployment. The unemployment rate rises during recessions and falls during expansions, but it will never truly be zero. Frictional unemployment is most workers spend at least some time engaging in a job searching process, just as most firms spend some time trying to fill the person for a new job opening. This is considered frictional unemployment. It is the short-term unemployment that arises from the process of matching jobs with workers. Seasonal unemployment refers to unemployment due to factors such as weather, variation in tourism, and other calendar events. Retail does a lot of seasonal hiring right now, right? Or they've hired or they're starting to hire for the retail season. Because seasonal unemployment can make the unemployment rate seem artificially high during some months and artificially low during other months, they report 2 types of unemployment. That is, one that is seasonally adjusted and one that is not. Then we have such things as structural unemployment. Unemployment that arises from a persistent mismatch between jobs and between the skills and attributes of the workers and the requirement of the job. This happens a lot. Even in the recession, there were unfilled jobs in technology sector and engineering, and these jobs go unfilled because current workers looking for jobs don't have the skill set to match that job. This is why there's such a push in the K through 12 system to cover STEM topics, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And that is because we consistently have unemployment. We have high unemployment rates, yet we actually have job openings in these fields that we can't fill because we don't have the required skills. Cyclical unemployment is caused by a business recession. So this is unemployment caused by a recession, which happened during 2007 through 2009. If we are at full employment, it is when only remaining unemployment is structural and frictional, and that the economy is said to be at full employment. The natural rate of unemployment. There is a normal rate of unemployment consisting because of frictional unemployment plus structural unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is also called the full employment rate or of unemployment. I just call it the natural rate of unemployment. So how should we categorize the unemployment at Bank of America? Although the BLS does not classify its estimate of total unemployment into categories, we can roughly categorize these Bank of America categorize the unemployment caused by the layoffs at Bank of America. Some of the employees laid off by the bank were unlikely to find new jobs without leaving the financial sector, so they have become structurally unemployed. And some of them were due to a business cycle, they could expect to find other jobs in financial firms after the economy recovers. Others would be able to find jobs at competing banks after relatively brief searches. So some government policies and the unemployment rate. So unemployment insurance and other payments to unemployed. This is the opportunity cost of continuing to search for a job, is the salary you are giving up at the job you could have taken. In the United States and most other industrial countries, the unemployed are eligible for unemployment insurance payments from the government, which can help the unemployed maintain their income and spending, lessening the personal hardship of being unemployed and also helping to reduce the severity of the recession. Many high-income countries also have generous social insurance programs that allow unemployed adults to receive some government payments after their eligibility for unemployment insurance has ended. We extended the unemployment rates, the unemployment insurance or payments during the recession. Because of opportunity cost of searching for a job is lower in Canada and other countries in Western Europe, most economies believe that unemployed workers in those countries search longer for jobs, leading to higher unemployment rates. Minimum wage laws. We're going to discuss this in this chapter and a couple other chapters. But the minimum wage law is the federal government enacted a minimum wage law requiring firms to pay at least 25 cents an hour in 1938. By 2011, the lowest legal minimum wage a worker could be paid is $7.25. If the minimum wage is set above the market wage, determined by demand and supply of labor, the quantity of labor supplied will be greater than the quantity of labor demanded. Economists agree that the current minimum wage is above market wage for some workers, but they disagree on the amount of unemployment that has resulted because of this. So some things that we can talk about, and we talk about, I believe there was a question on your weekly blogs. So labor unions are organizations of workers that bargain for employees for higher wages, better working conditions, and for their members. About 9% of workers outside the government sector are unionized. And then we talk about what is a wage, efficiency wages, a higher than market wage that a firm pays to increase the worker's productivity. For example, if you go to work in the social work, I know a lot of you taking economics are going to work in social work, you don't technically, once you've gotten your license, make minimum wage. And that's because they want to pay you because you have training and you're available, and they want an efficiency wage when they pay you higher than the market wage in order to encourage you to work harder. The other thing that we need to talk about is price level. Price level measures the average goods and services in the economy, and the inflation rate is the percentage of increase from the price level from one year to the next. Because the GDP deflator includes the prices of every final good and service in the marketplace, it is the broadest measure of price level we have and may not clearly indicate how inflation affects the typical household. In the next chapter, we will focus on inflation changes by using the Consumer Price Index. The CPI is an average of prices of the goods and services produced in a typical urban family of 4. So the CPI makes up a basket of goods. You've heard this. The basket of goods in December 2010 was made up of all of this. And this is the breakdown of percentages. I'm not interested that you specifically know this, but here's a view of it. I'm also not going over calculating with the CPI. So there are 4 biases with the CPI that overstate the true inflation rate by 0.5 percentage point or 1 percentage point, according to most economists. Situation bias. In constructing the CPI, they assume that consumers purchase the same monthly amount of each product in the basket. But consumers actually buy fewer of those products that increase most in price. There's an increase in quality bias. So we make the assumption that only the pure inflation part of the price increases is included in CPI. But some price increases are included partly because they reflect an improved quality. A new product bias. For many years, the BLS updated the market basket of goods used in computing CPI once every 10 years, which excluded new products which had been introduced between updates. The outlet bias. Because they continue to collect price statistics from traditional full-price retailers, they do not reflect prices that consumers actually paid at discount stores and or over the internet. And the PPI is an average prices received by producers of goods and services at all stages of the production. All right, I'm actually going to skip through this. I am going to cover this. So an interest rate is the cost of borrowing funds expressed as a percentage of the amount borrowed. A nominal interest rate is the stated rate of the loan. real interest is the nominal interest rate minus inflation. For low rates of inflation, a convenient approximation for the real interest rate is real interest rate equals nominal minus inflation. And we actually could potentially have deflation, which is a decline in price levels. And this is the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. So nominal interest rates, real interest rates, they actually went below zero here in the 80s and then again in the recession. Inflation affects the distribution of income. To the extent in which inflation redistributes income depends partly on the inflation, whether or not the inflation is anticipated, in which case consumers, workers, and firms can see it coming and prepare for it, or if it's unanticipated, in which they did not see it coming and they can't prepare for it. So the problem with anticipated inflation. So when inflation occurs, it is perfectly anticipated by some individuals will experience the cost. Menu cost is the cost of firms changing prices. The problem with unanticipated inflation is that actual inflation rate turns out to be very different than expected, and some people gain and some people lose. The outcome seems unfair to most people because they are either winning or losing only because something unanticipated has happened. This apparently unfair redistribution is a key reason people dislike unanticipated inflation. So, should you change your graduation plans based on a recession? At the beginning of the chapter, we asked you whether or not layoffs in the banking industry should cause you to change your major or give up your plans. We have learned that the unemployment rates are higher and layoffs are more common during a recession. Because you are a sophomore and graduate a few years later, the recession may have likely ended and the unemployment rate may have declined. You might also want to investigate whether these layoffs in the banking industry represent a permanent contraction in the size of the industry or just a temporary decline due to a recession. If the reduction in banking jobs seems to be more permanent, you might want to consider a career in another industry. If the layoffs appear to be due to a recession, then you probably don't need to change your career plans. And that's the end of the overview.